Thank you all so much for joining us today for the next installment in the Grinzebach Lear & Associates webinar series. Today's topic is making your case to principal and major gift prospects, and we have over 90 participants joining us today for this discussion, as well as several large groups at many of these locations, and we are so happy to have each of you take part in today's session. Our webinar today is co-presented by Joe Sanders, GG&A Vice President for Advancement Communications, and Pamela Buell, Associate Vice Chancellor for Medical Alumni and Development for the School of Medicine at Washington University in St. Louis. Joe Sanders joined GG&A in 2001 and brings 36 years of experience in public relations and marketing for institutions of higher education and other nonprofit organizations. His counsel and direction have built award-winning communications programs at public and private institutions. We are absolutely delighted to have Pamela Buell join us today. Pamela brings more than 30 years of expertise serving in development programs at Johns Hopkins University, where she led the Principal Gifts programs for 8 years, as well as Indiana University and Penn State. Pamela joined Washington University in St. Louis in 2007, where her focus is on designing strategic approaches to develop and maintain relationships with major and principal gift donors. In today's session, Joe and Pamela will offer a discussion on the variety, scope, and multiple formats that are used with success when presenting the case for support to major and principal gift prospects. For the first half of today's session, Pamela will address major questions of how much information to present on prospects, when to present, how much to personalize, and how to engage others in the process. She will share examples of what has been successful and what has not. During the second portion of today's webinar, Joe will lead a discussion that will outline specific strategies for making your case, producing customized communications, and assembling the elements of successful communications. Our presenters welcome any questions you have throughout today's session. We'll be answering those questions at the end of today's session. Please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Select all participants from the drop-down menu and send Joe and Pamela your questions. Tomorrow afternoon, we will be sending a recording of the session along with a short survey to gain your feedback. Feel free to send the presentation recording to any of your colleagues that were unable to make it today. So thank you all again for joining us today, and now I'm going to hand it over to Pamela to get us started.
Thanks, Stephanie, and welcome to everyone. I'm glad you could join us. And so I'm going to begin, here we go. I'm going to begin a session that's going to focus on cultivating and soliciting gifts, as well as identifying roadblocks or course changes along the way, and then how to overcome the challenges and strategically adjust to the course changes. We'll do this by collaborating with partners and using appropriate collaterals. So let's set the stage with a few generalizations about major and principal gift prospects on which I'm basing this presentation. The nature of the relationships are highly individualized, they truly are, and that requires specific strategies and gift plans for each prospect. With our major and principal gifts, we nearly always have partners, institutional partners involved. And by partners, this could be another development director, it could be someone in your planned giving program, it could be a professor, a physician, a nurse, a dean, a volunteer, but you almost always have someone involved. Better yet, even though you create gift plans and strategies, the outcome of the plan seldom follows the original design. So be ready to update, revise, and refine your strategies as things go along. When you're developing and executing a gift plan, make sure that the gift plan is very straightforward, that it's clear and it's focused on action. Stay focused on the specific purpose in order to have an outcome that will then require an action. This is the way you keep things moving forward. Your partners are not always involved, but they need to understand when they will be involved, and they also need to be in agreement with their involvement and the nature of it. For good planning purposes, you want to know what collaterals you believe you will need at each step along the way. Now I'm going to set the stage very quickly for to put together a gift plan and then act it out a bit. What we're going to do is look at something where we're going to have a prospect, there's going to be a change. In this case, we have a married couple. We know they have major gift capacity. It's the single most important thing. If they don't have major gift capacity, we shouldn't be thinking about them. Their giving is they give annually about $5,000 a year. He's an alumnus of this institution. She is not. And we know that the institutional priority is scholarships. We also know that, like a lot of us, we have prospects in our portfolios that we know, but we don't have a really good relationship. That's where the volunteer can come in and help give us some depth of relationship, give us more of an in. So I'm going to go ahead and set a goal for an endowed scholarship of $5,000 and then a 5-year commitment to the annual fund that would be about $10,000. Very quickly, in a gift plan, you'll have your best volunteer identified. Quite often, that person is going to contact the prospects to sort of warm them up a little bit, and that's because the volunteer is the one that has the great relationship with the prospects. You might go ahead and do the work of scheduling the meeting. Do the meeting, you take the materials that you need. In this case, because we're talking about scholarships, we'll take a generic brochure, and we'll also take along the case for the annual fund since we want them to make continuing annual fund gifts. There will probably be several steps following the meeting to determine what the real nature of the gift is going to be or what direction they're going to go. And then you'll go ahead with a formal proposal. That's the collateral you need. You'll document the gift. You'll need a gift agreement, whatever your institution uses. You'll steward the gift, and there's usually a stewardship plan, although I'm not going to get into that. That's a completely other conversation, but it is part of your planning. And then about year 4, if you have a 5-year pledge in year 4, you should be thinking about what your next plan is. Let me add quickly, I know that there are a lot of people on the line who are also involved in medical institutions. So volunteers don't quite work the same way. They aren't involved in the same way. You might not use them at all. HIPAA certainly is a major factor for all of us in this, so you adjust accordingly. Now what happens, though, in reality? You have a good plan, you have a good volunteer, and you find out that they aren't even interested in scholarships, in your great plan, before you even have the first meeting. And I will say that this is based on something that's happened to me in the last 6 months, so and it's happened before to me as well. And you're scheduling the meeting, and in the process you find out they aren't interested in scholarships, but they'd like some other ideas. And then they reveal that there's an endowed professorship in their estate plans. Well, this is great. So you're going to quickly design a new plan, and you're going to focus on the academic home of the alum, which in this case we're going to choose an architectural design program. And we're going to focus on the priorities of that program in order to design the new gift idea. You also find out, as is often the case, that the materials you would like to use related to a specific program are maybe a year out of date, 6 months out of date, and you can't use undated collaterals. The other thing that happens at this point, and this is early in, remember you haven't even had a meeting with the prospect, this is information you've learned by phone, you're finding out that you need to add the program director of the architectural design program, and you need to get planned giving involved as well. Another example, again, thinking of the medical world, we might think that someone has an interest in cancer because that might be the recent disease that they've encountered. But you find out in talking with them by phone, setting up an appointment, doing some follow-up, you find out that their real interest might be, let's say, genetics. So again, we need to be so flexible and be able to change gears quickly. So now here we are. You're at the 3rd step of the whole gift plan. You've changed direction already. You're trying to find out what's right. And one of the most important things you need to do is brief your volunteer. You have to be absolutely certain that the right messages are conveyed, and that's your job to convince the volunteer to do it and to help that volunteer be strategic in his or her approach. So put together a briefing. All it has to be is 1 page. It simply needs to state who the participants are, what the objectives are, some background on the prospects or the gift idea that you're going to discuss, and then the anticipated outcome. And emphasize to your volunteer that you need to have a next step in place at the end of the meeting. So much of our discussions will stop because the prospects don't know what to expect next, the volunteers don't quite know what to expect next, and better yet, we all haven't agreed on what it is. So I think that a one-page briefing is vital. You can send it to your volunteer in advance. It gives that person a chance to ask questions of you, and it makes the meeting go a lot smoother. In this case, for this briefing, I don't have any collaterals for it that would be taken to the prospects because we don't have any. In the meeting, the important thing is for the prospects to define their priority. So let's say they do, and it is indeed the priority of that program. But they also say that they won't make an annual gift. They aren't interested in that, but you can document the professorship. So quickly, again, you learn information that you can act on at different speeds. They'll need a proposal. Do they need it immediately or do they need it in 3 weeks? They need an MOU for the estate gift. Is that something that needs to be done immediately? Does it need to be done in conjunction with the basic proposal? You need to always talk about how you're going to deliver things, when you're going to deliver them, so everyone knows what to expect. And of course, now at this point, you've learned you need another partner. You have to add the communications office, so one more person involved. I'm going to go back to a basic proposal format that I like because I think it's one that I've been successful with in communicating with donors, which is very simply to state what the name of the program or the fund would be that they're going to establish with the endowment gift, state what the amount is, clarify that it's to name and endow the program, state what the purpose is, and then how the uses of the fund, how the fund will be used. What are the important uses of the fund? And one of the things that I always include is that it will inspire other philanthropists. And I think that that's part of the reason that many people want to give. They want it to have a multiplier effect. This kind of proposal can take any form. It can be a letter, an email, one sheet, fluffed out, formal. It can be whatever you want. It's whatever your donor wants, though, that you're really going to do. And Joe's going to talk about this a little bit later. So some of the decisions that we need to make along the way. What happens when your plan is wrong? The most important thing to remember is don't press the idea. If they don't like it, you can't change their mind. Certainly with major gifts, this is the case. And make sure your volunteer doesn't. So if your volunteer is really fixated on scholarships and your prospects really don't care, you have to make sure that the volunteer is enthusiastic about whatever the prospect is enthusiastic about. Also, when you change directions, you need to learn more about what the true interest of the prospect is before you start bringing other people into the meeting. For instance, the program director, how disappointing it would be to bring in someone from the program of architecture. Have that person sit there only to hear, wow, we really aren't that interested in your program after all. And so we have an obligation to keep our partners in the loop, but they don't necessarily need to be in the meeting until you're really ready for it and until the prospects are ready for it. So just ask them. Ask the prospects who they want to communicate with next as you continue developing the ideas. So now I'm going to switch over to principal gifts and look at how we're communicating with principal prospects. So briefly, for very high-level principal gifts, so let's say we're in the high 8 figures, there tends to be a singular focus on the gift, or it's a unique opportunity. The prospect's gift is really essential for a project to advance. This is usually the case. Quite often, it's a person who has a very clear understanding, very deep understanding. You know, some of our very high-end projects are projects that only certain people can understand, that they don't make sense to everyone. So your prospect is often an institutional insider that has pretty deep roots, maybe a long history with your institution, but not always. For every one of these generalizations, I guarantee you there are at least 5 exceptions. Usually with principal gifts, the highest level of institutional leadership is involved. And sometimes that's the only institutional person who's involved, that some principal prospects don't want to deal with anyone except the president of the institution. There's usually a greater level of financial complexity. There's also this business where, how do you get peer pressure? Is there such a thing as peer pressure? I don't know. Some of the people I've worked with have told me they don't have any peers. So that is kind of clear that peer pressure is not something that could ever help with these gifts, or with certain ones. The other thing is that your prospect, your very high-end principal prospect, is probably engaged in another institution. Unless this person only gives to your institution, that you are the sole recipient of this person's philanthropy, you can be nearly certain that this person is generous to other institutions and has multiple institutions. So what are some of the challenges we're going to have now, and the ones that we need to keep working out? Just coordinating calendars. It doesn't sound like much to some people, but it can be a huge obstacle. We're dealing with very busy, important people. So it's hard to get it scheduled. And what can you do? How can you keep this on the front burner? Can you take charge of the scheduling? Or are you making sure that this prospect meeting is always at the top of the list of prospects for your leader? So you have the first appointment, but getting the follow-up can take months. Even people who are close to the institution, they might come in for board meetings, but they come in and they leave. There might not be time to schedule another meeting at that same time. So it's your job to keep this person very alive in the sense of the gift idea has to stay alive once it's been put on the table. Who can you talk to? Are there other advisors of the donor that you're working with? Is there someone that you can sort of keep in the loop so that they'll still be keeping the project in front of the donor? And then finally, one of the communication strategies, and Joe will focus on this more, is it's developing a formal proposal, but a formal proposal means something different for each prospect. How does this person receive information? How do they like to see their name in writing, or do they? Other challenges that we'll face and need to be overcome, the period to reach closure can be long. It can take 2 or 3 years. I've been involved with something recently. It was 5 years from the time the first discussion took place until the time that the gift was actually announced. So this is something where we need to remain enthusiastic and focused as development professionals, because it's very hard for other people to stay as focused as we are, or even to believe in the gift. Sometimes you aren't communicating directly with your prospect. You have to rely on other people to do it. Again, this is where you can often turn to advisors of the prospect, financial advisors, lawyers, who are often involved in this anyway. And of course, one of the big challenges is keeping your institutional leadership excited about it while you're waiting 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years for a gift to actually close. For a principal gift plan, I believe that you must have it approved by the institutional leadership. You develop it and present it, or you're developing it in conjunction with leadership, and you have it approved, usually single focus. It might have fewer steps, but a long time period between them. The plan could have very few partners that actually are directly engaged with the donor, and yet many partners involved in the many steps that it will take to keep this moving along. And quite often, your proposal is going to be designed at the same time as the gift plan, because this is one, again, it's a singular focus. So I have a favorite format for principal gifts. It's the favorite elements that I have. Basically, the title page, contents page, and an executive summary. And frankly, you could stop with that, because the executive summary will have everything that follows, but in one page. I created something that I call a tribute to the prospect. And this tribute is a way to really let a prospect know you're aware of their philanthropy, you're aware of their interests, you appreciate it, it's deeply appreciated. And it's also a way to tie what their philanthropic contributions have been back into the gift that you are asking for. Not everyone likes this idea of a tribute, but when it works really well. The rationale for the gift, we always need that. We always need to solicit, and we always need to say how the gift is going to be stewarded and how the person will be recognized. So these are basics, and again, this could take almost any format. It's just whatever your donor wants. And now I'm going to do a quick wrap-up. There are 3 different kinds of gifts that I just wanted to bring to the discussion. They're important for both major and principal gift prospects, and there are challenges that are specific to each one in communicating. Gifts for research, and I'm thinking about medical research right now. A lot of people don't understand that a $2 million endowment might not do a great deal for medical research, but $2 million in spendable money could see some good advances. In many institutions, there's a great focus on endowment. I know certainly ours has. But it doesn't always work with research projects in medicine unless it's a very significant endowment. So what do people need? They need a project description, and then they need to know examples of how the funds could be used. These are not projects that you'd actually be promising. They're projects that you're going to describe. So if we had this gift, these are the kinds of things we could use it for. Give 2 or 3 examples. State the goal for the project, state the current status of the research, and state what the philanthropic difference would mean. In other words, but for philanthropy, would this happen? The special considerations for the medical research is just that. Does it take place without philanthropy, or are you going to get an NIH grant so that maybe you're going to keep going forward with this research? It's so important that we explain where seed money comes in, how it's used, and how it has a multiplier effect. Also, we can never promise an outcome. We are not curing something with someone's gift. Bricks and mortar gifts. That's another one that causes some real communications challenges with our donors at any level. These designs can change. If all you know is the footprint of the building and you're being asked to raise money for it, that's pretty hard. If you know the footprint with how many stories the building's going to be, that's a little more interesting. But we know that things change. So if you use images, specify that they are artist renderings. Make it clear that this could change. Be very clear about this. Until the building is completed, until it's done, until everything is in place, you can still have changes. So stay in touch with your project manager. Make sure that you have a good relationship there, that they know what the naming opportunities are. And as you're talking with donors, keep the project manager in the loop. So if there starts being a shift in that building design, you're going to be the first to know, so that you can then communicate very quickly with your donors and come up with an alternative space for naming. The last example I'm giving is about patients and institutional priorities in academic cultures. If you're in a university that happens to have a school of medicine, most of the people who come in as patients don't care about scholarships. They might not care about anything except their own disease areas. That's where many of them give. So the priorities of the university can appeal, but it's when they're tied to a specific disease interest. So some projects in biomedical engineering could have great appeal to patients, but usually only after they have done something to help the research of their key doctors or an area that they're really aligned with. On the other hand, patients who've had multiple generations of care at your institution and have connections to many physicians, they can actually be prospects for building projects. They're especially good prospects when their physicians encourage the gift. And then finally, if you're in a comprehensive campaign in an educational institution, make sure that you've developed some very distinct collaterals for patients and their families. They probably won't care about the campaign, but you need their gifts in your campaign, so just develop something that's distinct and doesn't have maybe not campaign all over it, but allows you to continue raising funds from that particular patient group. So in closing, develop your plans for the prospects and be strategic. Involve as many partners as you need and communicate with them. Know when to change directions and be strategic when you do, and always use the best collaterals. So thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Pamela, for opening up the first half of today's webinar. I want to remind our audience we're about midway through here, so please send in your questions for the end of today's presentation using the chat function in your menu. And now I'm going to hand the controls over to Joe Sander, who's going to walk us through communication support and proposal development.
Thank you. First thing I'm going to do is see if my controls work, and they do. So we're off to a good start. As I work my way through this part of the presentation, I'd like for you who are taking part today to keep in mind that you could be part of three possible scenarios. You may be a communications professional yourself who's supporting fundraising communications, and you may be in partnership with a major gifts officer. And so one of the scenarios will be where there is that in-house partnership between the major gift officer and in-house communication support. You may be in an organization in which you have no in-house support and you're getting your support from contracted services. And then you may be in a small kind of institution and be a major gift officer, and there you have neither in-house communication support or contracted services on call, and you are, in fact, a communications professional. In that case, I'd like for you to think of someone who wears two hats, and sometimes you have to talk to yourself like a major gifts officer, and sometimes you have to talk to yourself like a communications professional, and you're managing someone with a split personality, and that's you. The first thing that you need to think about is that no solicitation, or let's say extremely few solicitations for major and principal gifts take place in a complete vacuum of relationship with your institution. In fact, considering that many major gift prospects have been for many years annual donors or have made other kinds of gifts to the institution, your institution may be communicating with them in many ways that you need to research and inventory and find out about. You need to take a look at your institution's core case for support, or if you're in a campaign, your campaign case for support. And ask yourself, what messages are my prospects already receiving? We'll talk about that in a bit more in just a minute. What about periodicals? I mean both print and e-news. The larger your institution, the more these may be being sent out to your prospects and future prospects, and the harder it is to get any kind of message control over them. But you do need to find out whether these periodicals generally are helping you or not with your philanthropic message, or what they're saying strategically about the institution. So even though it is very labor-intensive up front, you need to, or get help to, conduct an inventory of what is going out to different constituents of your institution. Take a look at the stewardship that's going on right now for those who've given previous gifts, and make a judgment as to whether your stewardship communications are cultivating closer relationships, or if you were the donor, would you feel like you were just getting the minimal boilerplate stewardship report and there's just nothing in it that would indicate that the institution has further interest in you. You can ask yourself the question, if I had given a major gift to the institution 5 years ago and we're getting stewardship reports, what might I be saying to your other prospective donors who are my peers about the experience that I'm having? And then, of course, their call reports. What do they tell you about what your prospects have said about themselves and where this prospect stands. So I mentioned about the core case for support, and those of you who've ever sat in on any of my webinars before know that this is my equivalent of the Rotary four-way test that you have to memorize about what are the essential elements of your core case for support. A core case for support is your case for philanthropic gifts that goes on whether you're in a campaign or not. And you will see from these points that it is strategic. It is not anecdotal. Are you presenting your institution's greatest opportunities and needs over the next X number of years? Are you making these opportunities and needs matter to your institution's prospects and supporters? Alumni, parents, friends, grateful patients, whatever your particular supporters are. Can you show which of these opportunities and needs can be met only with philanthropic support and why? And do prospects perceive a benefit that they will create for people, society, or themselves by making a gift? And it has to be stated in a way that the benefit matters to the prospect. Now, every prospect is different, but can you state benefits in a way that prospects who are interested in certain things in life, they want to create opportunities for other students who couldn't have made it through college without a scholarship to have the same opportunity that they did? Are they seeing that benefit in the messages that you're communicating? So a core case for support can be a particular document, but more importantly, it is the sum total of messages that you are sending out over a period of time about your case for support in various kinds of communications: digital, print, periodicals, annual reports to donors, you name it. Are you seeing these elements come through? Now, many of those who are your future prospects are perhaps going to your website to make online annual gifts. And I have heard from quite a few of my clients that prospects for larger gifts, major gifts, like to do independent research if they're thinking about an area that they might want to support. So you really have to take a look at your website and ask yourself the question: if my prospects went to my website to find out what's going on in an area that interests them, could they find the information? And when they find the information, is it supportive of where you need to go philanthropically? To give you one example, a major university who I've worked with, they strategically made getting philanthropic support for research one of their top priorities over the next 5 years. And what they discovered and got feedback from their closest supporters is that it was impossible for someone to come into the website and find information on research that wasn't written for another academic, that was something that they could relate to. So they had to completely not only reconstruct the language of research on their website, but they also had to change the navigation of the website to make it easy to find the information they were looking for. And what about gift designations? I want to show you an example of a really terrific website that the communications firm M. Stoner did this website for MIT a few years back. Now, this page is no longer up. They've gone on and to use something else. But this is the main page of a collection of web pages that M. Stoner set up for MIT for the express purpose of turning their website into a search engine for prospective donors. You will see that they have set this up to, first of all, embed hot links that can be clicked on to take people to different priorities. But they went further than that. They have given people 2 other ways to look for areas that might interest them. One is a menu that they can click on any of these hot links and go to donor-friendly descriptions of where the university, what the university is doing and how it can use support in all these areas. And they got their own little internal Google search engine where if a person isn't finding the words they're looking for, they can type it in to the search key and get a list of topics that they can find. This site really enables an institution to put the prospect in control of finding what it is that they want to support. And if it's difficult, it makes it easier for them to get feedback as to what's not working and to be able to fix it. Okay, let's see if I can get back to where I wanted to get to here. So, in terms of what you heard from Pam about always having your backup plan, I had a backup plan in case I couldn't access that website. And you'll see that the next 2 pages, I downloaded just the text, and we don't need them now because you saw the website itself. So after you've done the survey of your communications environment and you've sort of made a list to yourself, what can I directly get done to change for the better, and what do I need to be a squeaky wheel about and try to get others to change to help what I'm doing? Now you need to take a look at what needs to be in your toolkit. Your toolkit are the things that you want to always have standing by, whether you won't use every one of them every time, but you need to have them readily available so that preparing a proposal is not always a panic attack, but it is something in which you can draw upon and modify readily available resources. And some of these, of course, would occur to you immediately. They do occur to a lot of institutions immediately. They just don't take the critical step of assembling them into an easily findable and searchable database that they can access quickly. Elevator cases and many case statements that are up to date. And think about Pam's presentation where she talked about having a generic to take on an initial call of the scholarship brochure and the case for the annual fund. That would be an example of an elevator case or mini case statement that's in your bank. You want to have not only the finished publications, but you want to have the text in manipulable form, like in Word or any other text document, so that you can begin customizing as needed from the text that's on hand. And that's to explore donor interest in early cultivation. You also want your background text from your core case for support, which means the text for the core case for support and any examples of articles that have been in your institution's magazines or fundraising materials that support the core points of your core case for support. Proposal templates we will go into in just a minute. You also want to have a good photo bank, illustrations, thinking of the different kinds of what your institutional priorities are and the different kinds of proposals that you might be taking to donors. Do you have all of these background illustrations and templates and materials readily available? Then finishing out your toolkit inventory. If you are working by yourself and the person who wears 2 hats, if you could put then at the top of your priority list just having access to talent in Photoshop, desktop design, and on-demand printing, who, if you have nothing else, that you have someone that you can get to help you, for example, we'll see an example later, to take an architect's illustration of a building and to Photoshop in the name of your prospect on the front of the building to say, this is what the John Smith Science Center will look like, and how we will present your name if you make this naming gift. These very simple tools can take very easily used formats like Word or PowerPoint and use them to present a very elegant proposal.
Mm-hmm.
You also need your template stewardship and recognition language. And one of the things to pay attention to here that Pam touched upon is that you have to make sure with your legal department and other parts of your organization that anything that you pledge to your prospect in the proposal, cultivation, and solicitation of the gift is something you can actually execute on. So you want to make sure when you customize stewardship and recognition language that you can get it reviewed, because you do not want to end up in a position where you put in a proposal that a person will get a certain kind of recognition and it turns out that you can't do that. Well, we're going to take a look at some simple templates for proposals. And one point being it can be very simple, and the other being it can also look terrific working with very simple tools. But I want you to remember that, as Pam said, she had her favorite way of doing proposals. She said, but sometimes it might be a letter, sometimes it might be long, sometimes it might be short. And the point of that is that the only right way to organize a proposal is the way your prospect wants it. But it also prepares you well if you have certain templates which address what you would say would be the centrist or the bulk of your prospects, and that would hit somewhere in that target. So following our points that constitute a complete proposal, shown again in a typical order of presentation, understanding that with individual donors, this might not be the order of presentation at all. The first is to identify the proposed gift, summarize the need, and make the ask in the first page. And if the prospect has supported your institution in the past, to recognize that support, and in some cases, to do the research that if your prospect has supported projects not at your institution, but at other institutions, which demonstrate that this prospect is a true philanthropist in support, say, of research on malaria, that you understand that and that you recognize what they have done, and then begin to make the transition to how you propose to do at your institution will build upon that commitment that they have. The second section then would be about your institution and priorities. It begins with the language from your core case and builds to the next section. What I mean by that is that you may work for an institution, and let's say that this might be a liberal arts college or an independent school, where what the institution stands for is not expressed in terms of a grand strategic plan to transform research, but is to reinforce the core values of the institution in today's educational context. So you begin with that statement, and if you know that where you are headed is to say to make a proposal for endowed faculty support, what you do is you use that paragraph then to talk about how faculty support that basic core mission, and how support for faculty is required in a particular area to make that mission relevant to today's education. The third section then gets into the nuts and bolts of the proposed gift and what it supports. The description of the project, facility, endowment, whatever it is, the details of the amount. Is it cash? Is it a 5-year pledge? If endowment is involved, how does endowment work? The combination. If the gift will leverage or make possible other funding sources, what your institution will do to make sure that this gift or donation has the most greatest effect on achieving the outcome that the donor seeks, and how the gift will create measurable benefits and for whom. finally end with your section on how you will provide recognition and stewardship. And I am very partial to proposals that just don't stop, but have a closing section that really goes and stresses, helps the donor visualize their gift at work in the future, or their gift at work to bring other people into support. So I'm just going to run you through some very simple things. Your format could be Word, it could be PowerPoint. They're both it's very easy to make the transformation from one platform to the other. These examples that you will see will be examples of both. This is a very simple cover page done for a museum that doesn't actually exist, called the Revolutionary Heritage Museum. But it is based upon work that a very wonderful museum called the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation has done in building support. And this would be a proposal to donors to help fund an endowment to purchase Revolutionary War artifacts when they become available for the museum. Here is a template that you can set up. This particular example is in Word, but you can also see how you could set it up in PowerPoint, where you take an element from your previous page on your title page, which is the red underline, which is the color of your institution. You take that and use that as your headings. You have your headings set up in the proper type. You have your boilerplate instructions of what goes in that. Your headers are already set up. So you're just ready to write when you get this and ready to drop in illustrations. This is an example. It's not a particularly attractive one, but this is an example of demonstrating to a donor their name on a sign out in front of the building. And this name was photoshopped in to an existing sign that's already in this technology park. And the building, which is now called something like the Electronic Discovery Building, they want James Watt to name this, and so they photoshopped the name in so they could see how they would be recognized. This is from a PowerPoint presentation, and this shows you how you can use an architect's rendering in your presentation to show John and Jane Smith where in this new garden, which is in a botanical garden, their meditation retreat will be located. And the accompanying text describes what will be in there. But they can visualize this beautiful garden and the area that they will. Here, finally, is an example from a closing section, and this is from an actual liberal arts proposal for a major gift. What I like about this is that they have set up the benefit of the gift in these last two sentences, and saying your gift will make a more than an immediate difference in the life of this college student today. As he or she joins a long line of successful art college graduates who continue to give back, your single act of giving now will multiply over future generations far into the 21st century and beyond. So they have set up the image in the mind of the donor of their gift making a difference in the life of a student who goes on to be a philanthropist herself and multiplies the value of their gift. Since we're running out of time, I just want to say that in working between communications officers and major gifts officers, you always need to, at a certain time of the year, take stock of what do we learn from last year, what are our priorities for the year ahead, and how can we avoid the last-minute rush jobs that plagued us in the year before. Here are my helpful tips. At the beginning, right now, take control of those parts of fundraising communications that you can, influence those parts that you can't, and have the wisdom to know the difference. Second, think like a marketing professional, not a mass communicator. The name of the game in major and principal gifts cultivation is you're not in the newspaper business, you are in learning how to communicate with individuals one-on-one in the way that they like to be communicated with. Focus on what your prospect values first, then look for ways that your institution can provide what he or she values. The importance of this is that you're always keeping in mind what the prospect wants, what the prospect values, not what your institution needs. and then that will come across in the language you present. Your prospect may be someone who has given speeches, and some of them may be in the area in which you are going to present this proposal. Do your research in that area. Find out what language they use when they're talking about this, and give that language back to them in their proposal. Then, as you always do, you're in better shape if you plan, and even better shape than that if once you plan, you're flexible. I think we're turning it back to you, Stephanie.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks so much, Joe. And I'm going to go ahead and take our audience here to the shared screen mode so everyone can see the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can start sending in your questions. We have about 10 minutes remaining, and we can get to a lot of questions in that time. So keep them coming. I received a few requests for today's presentation. We will be sending out a follow-up recording tomorrow, a follow-up email that contains both the recording of today's session with the audio, as well as a PDF of the presentation slides. So you all can be expecting that in your email tomorrow afternoon. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with some questions that we have here. Joe, we'll go ahead and start with a question I think that would be best for you to field. If you were to prioritize the order of which a full communications program should be developed, what would it be?
Yikes. I think that you always have to begin with a plan. If you're running a communications program, whether it's supporting advancement communications and fundraising or whatever, and you're not working with a plan, then you're asking for a life of repeated panic attacks and disappointment. And so what goes into that is research on your constituents, and I'm not talking, one part of that would be, the research on wealth capacity and inclination, but also research on your constituents and how they feel about the institution, their communications preferences, what they're interested in supporting. Then the inventory of what you're doing right now with your judgments as to how they're helping you or not, which then goes on to developing your core case for support. And then in complete partnership between communications and your fundraisers to set the priorities and the tasks that will be most important to accomplish in the coming year. My rule of thumb is that if you can have a plan that at the end of the year you have executed, that plan has been executed with 50% of your time, or you've executed 50% of the plan, you're pretty much in control of your environment, because let's face it, we work in a situation, as Pam described, where what you think is going to be the way that you're going to approach a prospect turns out not to be that way at all, and you have to change horses. There are situations where opportunities come up that you did not anticipate at the beginning of the year. So you want to think that, I can't plan everything I'm going to do all year, but if I have these basic elements in place, we will be in control of about 50% of what we do, and we're in pretty good shape.
Great. Thanks a lot, Joe. Pamela, do we still have you with us?
I'm here.
Great. We've had a few questions going back to your segment of today's presentation. The first question deals with proposal development. On your slide for the Principal Gifts proposal, the question is, how much should the tribute page change depending on your knowledge or relationship with that individual?
The tribute page is very individualized. So let me give you a couple of examples. In some cases, you kind of know your prospect. You don't know them that well. And I'll use the example of a patient. You don't know the patient that well. You clearly know the area of interest, and this is someone who has published a book. One of the things that you do is take a few phrases from the book that actually just would match up to the gift that you're going to propose. The other thing, though, is if someone has written a book, like this is an autobiography, they probably aren't shy about the tribute part, and so you can probably say a number of things about other institutions they've supported and the way that they have changed the landscape through their philanthropy, so to say. But as I said, this is something it varies so much with the individual, and in some cases it is not appropriate. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And another one I'll go ahead and toss to you, Pam. What do you do when your deans or your volunteers go off script and start discussing maybe some of their priorities versus the stated priorities of the potential donors? Do you have any recommendation for that situation?
Well, you know, of course, that never really happens, does it? Honestly, it is a very tough situation to be in when your partner that's there starts going off script. But I do think that there's a way that you can step back in as they complete a sentence. All you need to do is say, and you know, prospect so-and-so, you had just mentioned, go back to what the prospect last talked about and focus back on the prospect. And it's a nice way of not cutting off your dean or your president, but of helping them very, very deftly redirect their thoughts back to what the prospect last said.
Great, thank you. Joe, I have a question for you in regards to the MIT site that you shared. Was there any feedback that MIT received on that site? Did it generate any donors, donor interest?
I don't want to speak for MIT, but I did talk to Michael Stoner about this website before using it in this presentation, and I understand that the feedback about it was very positive. Let me invite people who are interested to email Mike. You can go to his website, or here is his email address, Michael, M-I-C-H-A-E-L, Stoner, S-T-O-N-E-R, at mstoner.com. That's his email address. You can also get that from his website, which is just www.mstoner.com. I'm sure he'll be glad to share with you what the outcomes were on that.
Fantastic. We're going to try to get a few more questions in here. And Joe, in regards to proposals and design, some of the examples you shared were very elegant and simple, whereas others we know out there are very glitzy with many photographs and great graphic design. Can you share your thoughts on what's overkill? At what point is it too much?
I can, and I think that this is illustrates better than anything else knowing your prospect. I have seen proposals to donors that are not only 5-color printed but die cut and embossed, and I mean, when you're considering you're producing one, I mean, you can't even begin to wonder how much it costs. But of course, if you're asking for $20 million, you know, then investing $25, $30 in one proposal becomes cost effective. The thing is that some donors expect for the level of gift that they are being cultivated for to get something that they can say, I can show my grandchildren, you know, my name on the building, and here's the history of it, and here's this wonderful publication, and it's something that they treasure. But many other kinds of prospects don't feel that way at all, and they feel, you know, from a business and cost containment sort of perspective, give me the information, make sure that all the facts are there upon which I can base my decision, and I don't want to see you wasting any money. And so that is why that for, I would say, more than half of your prospects, you can present something which is very presentable and attractive, doing it using these templates and desktop design. And my rule of thumb is try to find out for sure, but in those cases where you don't know, start off with something which is using the templates in Elegant. And if you get feedback from your donor that, for my level of gift, frankly, I was expecting a little bit more, say, I understand, and go back and then take them to the Ritz.
Great. We have reached the hour, but I'm going to try to get in this one last question that we had come in. And Pamela, I'm going to toss this one over to you.
Okay.
Do you recommend that a development communications department be housed in the university's development division or in the communications division?
My personal preference is for it to be in the development division. You just have a greater sense of what's going on. You have a greater sense of what priorities are. You have a greater sense of, who really is the high priority. And you learn a lot through osmosis. I think it's so good to be a part of the entire development process when you're in the communications office. So my preference is to have the communications office in development.
Great. Thank you, and that brings us to the end of our session today. So special thanks to Joe and Pamela, today's presenters, as well as our entire audience for joining us today. Again, please look for our follow-up email coming tomorrow afternoon that will contain the recording of today's session as well as the presentation slides. We hope you are all able to join us again for our future webinars. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
Are we off?